I remember one distinctly, one reader saying, "I am paying my taxes, damn it. Why do I need to pay?" So essentially they thought that the newspapers were part of the, communal infrastructure of Norway.
Welcome to the new episode of our podcast. My name is Koen Verstrepen, CEO and co-founder of Frumo. Today we have Pål Nedregotten as our guest. Welcome, Pål.
Thank you.
We are really happy to have you in our podcast. You are executive vice president at Amedia. Maybe it would be cool if you give us a short introduction to what your job is all about and what Amedia is all about.
Right, we can start with the latter first. Amedia is Norway's largest local media company. We hold full ownership of 79 newspapers all over Norway. And we have a huge reach every single day with all our products across Norway. So we reach roughly 2.3 million Norwegians every single day. There are 4.1 million Norwegians above the age of 18. So essentially we reach out to the majority of the Norwegian population every single day. We are a financially very healthy company. We've had EBITDA margins, EBITDA in approximating 50 million euros every single year since 2015. So we are a financially really solid company. We're owned by a trust, so all the money that we generate on the bottom line is being plowed back into product development and our journalistic development. So most of our growth and most of that comes from the way we've approached digital readership and digital subscriptions, which is now a really strong part of our business. So I'd say we've sort of tackled the digital transformation in a really good manner so far. In terms of my remit, so I'm executive vice president, and what I'm in charge of is essentially everything from product development and technical development, everything we do with data, everything, the entire data operation from identity management to the way we approach it in data science and the data platform is part of my remit. And I'm also in charge of subscription development as a whole. Not in charge of the newspapers, but with everything we do with acquisition and churn, and everything we do with the way our products are reaching our subscribers and potential new subscribers is also part of my remit.
Okay. Well, I think given your financial situation and the number of subscribers you have, it sounds like you guys, let's say, took on the challenge of digitization pretty good. So can you tell us what, according to you, was like key elements of the success recipe to get where you are today?
Sure. There are two phases to digitalization in the Norwegian media. The first started in the late 90s. So Norway has always been in terms of technical sophistication and technical infrastructure, has always been, at the vanguard in the world. And we have been since, I don't know when, but anyway, when the internet sort of hit the masses in 94, 95, we were fairly early on in trying to experiment with newspapers on the internet, and indeed I think some of the first publications after, I think Hotwired was probably the first one internationally. Some of the Norwegian newspapers, followed really closely behind. So in the late 90s, the Norwegian internet using population started getting a feel for online newspapers already then. So it's 25 years ago, essentially. So as the internet grew in Norway, newspapers grew with them. So we had a huge reach and a huge coverage in the internet population before Facebook was an issue, essentially, before Google was an issue in the advertising space. So that was the first part. In terms of reaching and you know, getting out to readers, that was the first part, and that worked really well. What didn't really, you know, connect with that first wave was the financing. And I think the next wave started essentially in 2013, 2012, 2013, when it was becoming more and more obvious that the reach that we had built was essentially not delivering the necessary amount of monetary value that we needed to finance journalism. And it was becoming really apparent to a number of us that you know, just going for reach and just going for the ad-funded business side of it would never finance local journalism as we had known it up until then. So for our part and my company's part in 2013, we recognized that we needed to do something with subscriptions on a digital side. And at that point, I mean, there were only two success stories really in the world. One was the New York Times, which had spent a humongous amount of money into developing their paywall, and the other was the Financial Times. And those two were essentially the only success stories we could look to. So it was very much, you know, doubting ourselves into this is the right thing to do. And it was when we launched the first newspapers with, I think we launched it across a period of a year and a half, all of our then, I think, 65 newspapers at the time. So we launched 5 and 5 essentially in waves. And it was very much an iterative process where we learned from what we actually, you know, got right and what we didn't learn. And data was very much part of that journey. So it's very much an iterative process, learning from the previous wave, taking those lessons into the next wave, and then, you know, taking those lessons and iterating it back to the first wave, essentially. So that was part of it. And another, I think, really important part of it was that both us and Schibsted, which is obviously the other large Norwegian actor, were pretty much doing it at the same time. So we were sort of educating the Norwegian newspaper reading public that news is costing money. And this has been a development that is, you know, gone really well, you know, right up to now, and still the arrows are still pointing upwards. So I think this is turning into a huge success story for us, and it's, you know, given us a belief that we're able to navigate this even though we're not out of the woods yet. Okay.
The fact that you educated the public in understanding that journalism costs money and therefore digital subscriptions are an essential part of delivering quality journalism. Did you need special actions or messages to do that? Or is it just like, well, the public understands and they go along?
Well, it's very much a process, right? And it's very much, you know, a gradual process. I think when the first newspapers were launched with a paid content model, we had, you know, a sort of crisis management staff on hand, especially in social media, to sort of answer all the criticism that we knew would come, right? And that for the first newspapers, the first, you know, few waves, that was a very significant part of it. So we had a very clear strategy to go into dialogue with these people protesting that, you know, we do not want to pay. And we even had, and I remember one distinctly, one reader saying, "I am paying my taxes, damn it. Why do I need to pay?" So essentially they thought that the newspapers were part of the, you know, communal infrastructure of Norway. But in each and every case, we had to go into a discussion and telling them, listen, producing journalism costs money, right? If we aren't making money, we can't do journalism, and we can't keep continuing to give give stories away. And some of them accepted that and some of them didn't. But what was really interesting was that, you know, half a year on, we still had those, you know, crisis management every time we launched a newspaper, but it sort of just fizzled away. And when, you know, we had newspapers launching and we had people, you know, at their keyboards, and we didn't have any reaction at all. And at some point, we still get that kind of pushback, but at some point, our subscribers started answering for us. So we didn't really have to do that job anymore. And our subscribers are actually now defending our need to make money in order to produce journalism.
Okay, that's cool. In terms of age distribution, do you see success in, let's say, getting also the younger people on board? Because that's something you see quite often, is that let's say newspaper readership is quite old. It's like people were used to reading newspapers in the old days. Then some of them got converted into a digital subscription, but there's a big gap with the young people. Let's say late teens, early 20s.
Right.
How is that going?
So, so first, the average age in Norway is 43. So if you look at, you know, the entire age distribution in Norway and you put up the average, you reach the age of 43. That includes everyone from newborn to 18, right? So if you take the adult population, it skews higher than 43. But that is an important, you know, backdrop. The other thing was that when we started out, we had absolutely zero digital subscribers in 2014. We had zero. We had 480,000 paying subscribers, but the average age of our subscribers was 63. And it was increasing by a year at a time. So essentially, they were dying at the top end, and we didn't get any new ones in at the bottom, right? It sounds brutal, but I think that's a fair description of the way things actually were. So in terms of what are we seeing with the digital subscriptions? So we're seeing the majority of new sales going to people below the age of 50, right? And we are seeing the average age of our subscribers it's sort of regressing to the mean. So it is progressing towards 43. But, you know, given that 43 also includes everything from newborn to the age of 18, I think we are essentially in a fairly healthy place. And in terms of reaching out to the right kinds of readers, I think there are some important groups of people you need to win. And I think for a local media company, the most important customers you need to reach are the ones between 30 and 40, and especially the women, right? This is when you settle down. This is when you sort of start a family, right? And that's when you start investing in your local community in terms of the quality of kindergartens, the quality of schools, the quality of, you know, the local football team for kids, right? So essentially you start investing in your local community in a completely different manner. That is essentially where we want to be a very clear value to those people who are sort of, you know, discovering those parts of their interest sphere which is broadening or whatever, because their life situation is changing. So local newspapers in Norway has sort of never been strong in the 20s, but we do have some significant traction in people in you know, their 20s as well. And in terms of those younger than 20s, when we created the subscription model, we had one key element, which is, you know, I think is still a very strong part of our value proposition. When you buy a subscription with us, you get 5 individual household accounts. So it's not just, you know, the one who is paying the bill, who's actually the user. We are giving the 18-year-old, we are giving So if the wife is paying, then we're giving the husband an account, we're giving the kids an account, but it needs to be tied into a household. And this also ties into our data strategy, right? Because we want people to be logged in as themselves to enable us to both, develop the right products, to do the right analysis, and indeed to do the right things in terms of personalization, which I think we're probably going to be talking about fairly soon.
Well, yeah, it is of course a topic I want to touch upon. But before that, I'm also very curious to know what type of paywall do you use, and has it always been like that, or was there a learning trajectory in terms of freemium paywall, a metered paywall, etc.?
So we never launched the metered paywall, and we could never get the math to add up, right? So before we launched, we sort of looked really hard on the different aspects that we had, and famously the New York Times was launching, they had a metered paywall, and indeed the first paywall that the Financial Times put up was also a metered paywall. We could never get the math to add up. So essentially what we recognized was that if a metered paywall is to work for us, then we need to set the meter at essentially the first article. So we sort of ruled fairly quickly the metered model out. And then it was very much a question of, all right, so let's go for a premium model. Some stories should be premium. And then we also, at that point, recognize that we need to have some part of the newspaper open and free and available to all. And this was at that time very much driven by the needs of the advertising space, right? Because we needed to deliver ad inventory. So when we started out, and this is the learning curve, when we started out, it was, when 30% or less of our newspapers were closed to subscribers, right? So 70% of everything we produced was open for everyone, and 30% was, for subscribers only. That was not enough to get traction. It was only when we passed the 40% mark that we started seeing traction in subscriptions. And also another, learning curve, which has been really, really important to us, is what kinds of stories do we actually write? And also what stories should be open and available to our subscribers, to our non-subscribers, and which should be reserved for our paying subscribers. So understanding our journalism, understanding which stories sell, understanding which stories, the amount of readership of our stories is contributing to less churn, has been a major part of the story of Amedia the last 5 years. And data is a crucial part of that equation.
Yeah, which brings me to the topic of data, AI, personalization. I would like to argue that the first wave was digitization, and now there is like a next wave starting, I would say, which is about intelligence. It's not anymore just about looking at the data and doing something with it. It's really about having smart components in your channels that use the data like in real time. And I believe that personalization is one important, let's say, example of that. Would you agree with that?
Sure. And I'd be very surprised if you didn't think that. But yeah, so personalization is something that we have been working on for quite some time. And I think that just the way we are talking about personalization and the change that we've seen in how we approach personalization has been really, really interesting, because some years ago, not all that many years ago, a couple of years ago, we had actors in this space arguing that we have a solution that you can just implement and switch it on, and then everything will be great, right? So it's like a black box AI, deliver all your data to us, we'll do some magic, and then we deliver magical results. And they usually had, testimonial saying, oh, our click-through rate went up from 42% to 44%, equaling this and that much money for the advertising space. I've always been really skeptical in terms of just, switching something on that I didn't understand and that we didn't have full control of. So personalization for us has always been, certainly for me, and I think for all of the members of my team, has been very much a question of how do we utilize the data that we have? And we do really have a really strong data platform. We have, complete control of the data flowing through it, and we have all the checks and balances in place. And this obviously took a number of years to get right. But I've always been more concerned with what is the use case, what is the need for those people on the other end that we are going to deliver. So we've done, in terms of some of the most interesting personalization that we've done, is done in specific parts of the customer journey. Could potentially be, for instance, one of the things where we invested quite a lot for the last year is in churn, and how people actually, what people experience when they want to cancel their subscription, right? How we ensure that the stories that we need to show you to enable you to continue to find value in subscription, how we surface those stories. But it's very specific use cases that we apply specific parts of the toolbox for. And we are seeing, just the way we approach churn. I think we are now in, we estimate that on conservatively, we've estimated that the churn efforts that we've done, in which personalization has played a major part, is saving somewhere in the region between 40 and 45,000 subscribers every single year. Which is turning into, significant money on the bottom line. But it's all about understanding our users' needs, understanding which parts of the customer journey they are, deciding that I'm not getting the value here anymore, right? And how do we approach that? How do we deliver that value?
Can you go deeper into how you can use personalization to reduce churn?
Sure. I mean, it's part of a number of things that we are doing to reduce churn. Just to give you one example. So one of the things that we've developed two indexes that we are using for product development. One is an engagement index that is trained on your behavior, your readership, right? Your readership habits, and it's trained towards the effect that readership has on your future loyalty. So it's sort of, if you have a high engagement, then your readership of our journalistic products is as an indicator of you continuing to stay with us for the next 3 months, essentially, right? Or if you have a low engagement score, it tells you something about your propensity to churn.
Yes.
The other index is built on the engagement index, but it's also factoring in everything that is not controlled by our journalists. So everything from payment, everything from how many people are registered to your account. So essentially the engagement index is looking at the journalistic toolbox, and the loyalty index is taking all those factors and putting it into things that we can control through purchase funnels and payment structures and whatnot. So the reason why I'm saying this is to give you an example of how we sort of approach that, because once you've decided to leave us, we have a win-back team calling you, right? And we do have a significant number of people leaving us every single month. So it's important to hit the right people with those phone calls. So essentially what we do, we use the loyalty index in ranking those who should be called up and look at which ones has the highest propensity to be won back. So that is one concrete example of how we're using, it might sound like a silly example of personalization, but essentially it's the same way we utilize the data, because we sort of understand clearly the value proposition, and saying this person has such a low loyalty score, it's no point in trying to call them. It's just a waste of, manpower and man hours. But these guys, call them, right? Offer them the right choice, and then we see win back rates, increasing dramatically. So that is just one example that we've been applying in the churn management part.
Okay, so the personalization is here at the level of, well, some people you contact, some people you don't. There is the personalized action, let's say. I would say that, would you agree that the next step would be that two people who have, let's say, the same propensity to churn, or when they churn, the same propensity to get win back, that it would make sense to approach them with different messages? So let's take the example of two people. They're still in your subscription, but you see that their engagement is dropping. And actually you could use this information to give your newsroom, let's say, a signal like, look, there are a lot of people who are at risk of losing because they're very interested in, I don't know, culture, and you did not cover this, let's say, in the last few weeks sufficiently. So maybe it's a good idea to write about culture.
Right. And yeah. So I mean, there are several ways of approaching personalization, and what we've been discussing so far is delivering insight that leads to certain kinds of actions, right? And there are other ways of doing it in terms of the live kind of management adjustment of, for instance, what you see on the front page when you visit, right? But in terms of what you are describing is giving a feedback loop to our journalists. Are you producing the right stories? Are you producing enough of those stories? That is very much both, analyzing all the data that go into the personalization, but it's very much working with our newsrooms, giving them recommendations, giving them dashboards that are live, enabling them to see that we are underperforming in this segment, or we are overperforming in this segment, and we are doing that, and I think we'll probably see quite a lot of development in this area over the years to come. But then, of course, there's the live part of, and we are doing that as well, on specific sections of our specific parts of our front page, is giving you, because you have this kind of engagement, or this kind of tendency in your engagement, it's declining, so you are being shown stories that we know you are probably interesting through statistical twins or whatever. The algorithms are sort of matching your behavior with others who are not seeing that decline in engagement. So it's very much trying to surface those stories you haven't seen yet, to deliver the kind of value that we know you would probably get out of it. So that is something that we are doing. This obviously creates another discussion in terms of one of the major discussions we have had is both in terms of editorial control on the front page, right? And the other is, are we creating filter bubbles? And how do we balance this? How do we take editorial decisions, feeding them into the recommendations? Something that we are continuously trying to figure out, and most of the things that I'm talking about that we're doing is experiments running on subsets of our audience. We're always doing, control groups, but it's very much an experimental phase that we're in. We haven't, really hit the major button saying this is the way it should work across all of our sites. But it's very much, learning from those experiments, figuring out how do we optimize the front page for you in your category versus, I don't know, your wife, right?
Yes. So what is there your current vision on editorial control on the one hand and automatic personalization on the other hand? Do you have a vision on where it's gonna go?
So yeah. We haven't had a strategic decision on that yet. It's very much running experiments. So what I think is really important, and what I think we'll probably never divert from, is to have some form of editorial control, right? So the editor is in the final instance responsible for everything that happens on the newspaper, right? So you need to enable our newspaper editors to override the recommendations in some manner, and this is getting into murky area, because once you start having thousands of variants on the front page to however many people you have visiting, then that control is slipping away. But one thing that you can certainly do is to have some stories being, having a flag being set by the editor saying this story should actually be viewed by all, because it's so important. It's so important to our local community that damn the consequences, everybody needs to see this. We cannot override that decision, right? But it's very much treating editorial signals as editorial signals, carrying a given set of weight, right? And I think that needs to be part of the factor. Another thing that I'm actually, I haven't I haven't concluded on this, but this is one of the most interesting things that I would love to find out. So one of the things we do see when we have a front page and say 60% of the stories on that front page is for subscribers only, the decision about which stories should be closed and which stories should be open are made by individual front page editors working in shifts, right? So we do have guidelines. Our newspapers do have guidelines in terms of which stories should be for subscribers and which should be for everyone. But what we see is between these front page editors and between newspapers, they are making different decisions, even within the same newspaper. So the editorial makeup of that balance is changing throughout the day, throughout the week, and over the course of a month or whatever. So what I'm thinking, and I've thought really long and hard about this, what I see as an opportunity is that we could approach this problem as a problem of yield. How do we yield the maximum value from the front page, right? Essentially, I think the machines and the data is actually probably better at making those consistent decisions over time than individual editors could be. Mm-hmm. The problem with that, of course, is that you are removing control. But then again, if you look at editorial decisions as signals, you could feed those signals into the algorithm and have those signals impact the decisions, the yield decisions. But I think that there is something really important and something really fascinating about how you could approach that. You could obviously have a story for you open and the same story for your wife closed. But in the local community, these stories are being shared, and that would probably create confusion, right? So in essence, we say there's a business decision saying that we are limiting the impact of potential yield by putting a business decision on top of that. But I think that there is something really interesting in approaching the problem of how do we get maximum impact in terms of, you know, creating as large as a funnel as possible to get new subscribers through that funnel while continuing to deliver value, perceived value to our subscribers. So that was a very long question, a very long answer to your very simple question.
Yeah, but it was very interesting, and I would like to get your opinion on the following statement, because I think the question between personalization and automation on the one hand and control on the other hand, it's not a binary one, in the sense that it's not either you give every control away or you keep it all. Also not only about, let's say, flagging certain articles. I do think there is a very big zone where there is a lot of room for editors to define rules, like what percentage needs to be paid content. If it's paid for one person, it's paid for every person, because it has to do with fairness and with being clear. There needs to be an amount of variety. So it cannot all be sports, it cannot all be politics, etc. So I do think that there is this marriage between these two worlds. And the question there is to find those editorial rules that on the one hand give sufficient control, and on the other hand are also practical to work with, and let's say give a good mix and a good end result in the end.
Exactly, and I think it's possible to find those answers and to give the necessary amount of control to our editors. But it's equally obvious to me that there are so many potential variables. So just, you know, how do you balance advertising income with subscription income, right? What are the CPM levels on this user versus that user? I mean, these are input factors that, for one thing, on one hand, the editors can't possibly take those decisions, because they need to make free and open decisions in terms of the journalistic product. But what I'm saying is that there are so many potential variables going into an algorithm that makes these decisions that it's impossible for a human being to compute that live, right? So it sort of it goes down to your routines and your gut feeling in terms of those decisions. And essentially, if that is what is controlling your yield, then I think the machines could probably do a heck of a better job. but it's very much, you know, how do we create the control mechanisms that is, you know, giving the comfort to our editors that yes, we are still in control. We are data informed, data guided, but not data driven. You know, it's not a herd of cattle we are running here, right?
But maybe we disagree there. I don't know, because being a human making every decision, being data informed is one thing. A human setting some boundaries and leaving then room for the machines, for the robots to make, let's say, decisions without the human interfering, that's something else. Would you leave a possibility open for actually really certain spots being filled by the
machines?
AI?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and indeed we are doing that today as well. So it's very much a question of which parts are necessary to control, right? Where do you set the boundaries? How do you balance the potential versus control? And that balance is really crucial to figure out. And I don't think probably no one has figured those things completely out. It's very much something that we are doing, you know, figuring out as we go along. But I do think that is there's an ethical part of it, and there's a, technology always allows us to go further than the law, right? The law allows us to go further than ethics. So essentially, how do you play the ethical side of what we're talking about? Because the ethical side should set boundaries, but they should be boundaries and they should be guidance. You can't, I mean, as you said previously, I mean, it's not a binary choice. It's not, either you have full personalization, full computer control, or full human control. It's very much a question of how do you augment these to create the best possible impact for your journalism and for your local readers.
And if you look at this from a practical perspective, so I think we a lot of people agree on this, and a lot of people agree on that this is the way ahead, this is where it's going. Only for almost everybody, it's very unclear, like from where we are right now, how do we get there? How do we figure out these things? According to you, what is the process to take that road?
Well, it's certainly not going there in one big bang. That is, I think, the opposite of that. I think it's very much, the kind of way we are iteratively approaching this, doing experiments, small-scale experiments, with a clear understanding of which part of the customer journey, which part of the customer value proposition are we now playing with, and how do we optimize these things. And as we continue doing that, we get a much clearer understanding of the pros and the cons. And bit by bit, you've actually changed the entire culture of the way you approach product development, and the way you approach the way we communicate journalism to our readers. So in my book, it's very much an iterative process, and it's very much a learning process. There is no script. You can sort of saying, this is the best practice, guys, go out and do this and everything will be fine. It's very much a figuring out, how do these things that we are tinkering with, how is that playing out in real life scenarios? So one of the things that we firmly believe as local publishers is that our journalism has value for local communities, right? In terms of, sustaining democracy, in terms of, all these, big words about the role journalism plays. But we firmly believe that. So everything that we are talking about in terms of personalization needs to support that. If it undermines that, then we are doing something wrong. Then we are doing harm and damage to our local communities. So it's very much the iterative process I'm talking about. Is very much, how do we continue to fund journalism? How do we continue to fund that important journalism that is creating that, civic society? And how do we do that while maximizing the impact of the way that journalism is being carried out to people who are willing to pay for reading news.
Okay, cool. Well, to wrap it up, maybe one final question. If other publishers are today maybe in the beginning of their personalization journey, what would be your, let's say, if you look at yourself in those early days, you started to work on it, what would be your advice to your younger self, knowing what you know right now?
I think probably, and this might be a surprising answer, but I think what I've learned most is how you build a culture for actually getting this done. I mean, you might have a couple of really brilliant technology guys. You might have the odd product development person who has a clear vision of where this is going. And you might even have an editor or two who is recognizing that this could potentially be important. But building a, it's very much like a pyramid, right? At the top you have research and in-depth, understanding of, maths and statistics and methodology. And then at the, mid-level of the pyramid, you have analysis, you have analysts, querying data in terms of, business intelligence tools or what have you. And then at the bottom end, you find gut feeling, right? And this is, when this works, it goes from the top filtering through, enabling everybody to see that this is important. This is something we can do. This is a toolbox that is interesting. This is a toolbox that could actually help us achieve our goals. And I think that is by far the most important part of it. And that has everything to do with how you organize your organization, how you have, different reporting structures, and indeed not least in how you structure your data. Where we came from, we had data silos in every single department. So subscription data was in one silo, advertising data was in one silo, readership editorial data was in one silo. You bought off-the-shelf tools that created its own silo, right? And you need to have a 360-degree view of your customer. Your customer doesn't care who governs the system that controls the data, right? So I think it's very much part of the organization. It's very much part of how you approach that. That is actually much harder than the technology side.
I agree. Thank you for sharing all those wonderful insights, Pål. I really appreciate your time today. So yeah, to sum it up, I would say technology is interesting, technology is cool, but culture below that technology to make it work and to make people actually use it and sustain it in a sustainable way is probably even more important. So thanks again, and good luck with the rest of your journey.
Thanks, Koen. It was a good meeting you and good talking to you.
Okay. For people watching this podcast, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay tuned for our later interviews. Thanks a lot.